She'd spent 3 years preparing for the perfect wedding, then lost it all in one afternoon. But what Elena Cross never expected was that the stranger she met in the dark bar that night was the city's most powerful mob boss. And before dawn, she was his legal wife. Not for love, not for money, but because of the burning anger still raging in her chest. If you want to know how dangerous a betrayed woman can become, stay until the end. Like and comment the name of the city you're watching to let me know how far my story has progressed. She came home carrying paper lanterns. That was the detail that would stay with Elena Cross long after everything else collapsed. The way the lanterns kept swinging from her fingers in their thin plastic sleeves, rustling against her hip as she climbed the stairs, still warm from the afternoon she'd spent at the craft market 2 blocks south of Meridian Avenue. Soft gold and ivory, the colors she and Marcus had chosen together on a Tuesday night 6 months ago, when the wedding felt like a real thing and not just a contract she'd been honoring alone. She didn't check her phone when she reached the landing, didn't call ahead. She'd lived in that apartment for 3 years and she'd stopped thinking of it as a place that required announcement. The door was unlocked. She noticed that, filed it somewhere behind the tiredness in her shoulders, and pushed inside. The living room smelled like Marcus's aftershave, and something else she couldn't immediately name, something warm and close, and the paper lanterns made their small rustling sound as Elena stepped past the entry table and into the hallway and saw through the open bedroom door what she should have seen coming 12 months ago if she hadn't been so determined to believe in the version of her life she'd constructed with her own hands. Marcus was not alone. The woman beside him had Elena's hair color. Elena registered that first, stupidly, the dark fall of it across Marcus's bare shoulder, before her brain finished computing the rest of the scene, before she understood that the hair belonged to Diane, her sister. Diane, who had stood beside her at dress fittings and pretended to cry over fabric swatches and asked 3 separate times whether the rehearsal dinner would have an open bar. Elena didn't scream. She had imagined this kind of moment before, the way people sometimes do when the fear of a thing grows large enough to feel like prophecy. She'd imagined screaming, throwing things. She'd imagined herself wild and righteous and impossible to ignore. What happened instead was that her hands went completely still, and the paper lantern stopped rustling, and she stood in the hallway of her own apartment looking at the 2 people who had systematically hollowed out her life and felt nothing. A white, pressurized nothing, like the silence before a structure gives way. Marcus saw her first. She watched his face move through shock, guilt, and this was the thing that finished her. A flicker of irritation, as if she'd interrupted something he'd been planning to handle on his own terms. "Elena!" She turned around. She walked back through the living room, past the entry table where her keys landed with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence, and out the door she left open behind her. She did not take the lanterns. She left them on the hallway floor in their plastic sleeves, pale gold and ivory, colors she had chosen with a man who had been choosing someone else at the same time. The stairs took her down. The street took her south. August heat pressed against her like something with weight and intention, and Elena Cross walked without direction because direction required a destination, and she no longer had one. The bar was called Rudy's, though the sign outside had lost its apostrophe somewhere along the way and now just read Rudy's in unlit neon. It sat at the bottom of a block on the east side of the Meridian Warehouse District, the kind of neighborhood that had been gentrifying for 15 years without ever quite getting there. All cracked sidewalks and good bones and a persistent smell of diesel from the freight corridor 2 streets over. Elena had never been inside. She went in because the door was propped open and the darkness inside looked like relief. The place was half empty in the way that certain bars always seem half empty, regardless of the hour. A permanent, ambient vacancy, a collection of people who'd agreed by unspoken contract to leave each other alone. 4 stools at the bar. A row of booths along the south wall with cracked vinyl the color of old tobacco. A jukebox in the corner that was either broken or simply not being used. She sat at the bar and ordered whiskey, and when the bartender, a heavy-set man in his 50s with the exhausted patience of someone who'd heard everything, set down the glass, she drank half of it in one pull and felt it burn all the way down to the place where the white nothing was sitting and do absolutely nothing to it. Bad day. It wasn't a question. The voice came from 2 stools to her left, and Elena didn't look up immediately because she didn't want to invite conversation, and she was fairly certain her face looked like an open wound. "I'm fine," she said. "Didn't say you weren't." She looked up. The man on the stool 2 seats away was— she'd have struggled to explain it later, the specific quality of his presence. He wasn't performing anything. That was the first thing. He sat completely still, in a suit that cost more than Elena's monthly rent, dark charcoal with no tie, the collar of his shirt open by exactly one button, and he wasn't watching her with sympathy or curiosity or the particular male attentiveness that comes with intent. He was simply there, occupying space the way load-bearing walls occupy space, quietly, completely, without apology. He had a glass of something clear in front of him that he hadn't touched. "You want to tell me what happened," he said, "or do you want to sit there and drink until you don't need to?" "Second one," Elena said. "All right." He picked up his glass. She drank. The jukebox stayed quiet. Outside, a truck moved through the intersection, and its headlights swept briefly across the bar's front window, and then were gone. She told him anyway. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because he hadn't pushed. Maybe because the whiskey had loosened the seal on something that needed air. Maybe because he was a stranger and the apartment door was still open behind her in her mind, and there was nowhere else for the words to go. She told him about Marcus, about Diane, about the 3 years and the lanterns and the flicker of irritation on Marcus's face that had somehow been worse than anything else. She told it flat, without editorializing, the way you tell a story when you're too tired for performance, and the man— she still didn't know his name— listened the way very few people actually listen, without preparing his response while she was still speaking, without flinching or offering the reflexive consolations that would have made her feel worse. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, "The lanterns." "What?" "You left them." "I didn't want them anymore." "No," he said. "You didn't want what they were supposed to mean anymore. That's different." Elena looked at him properly for the first time. He was somewhere in his late 30s, dark-eyed, with a jaw that looked like it had been set against something for a long time. There was a scar along the left side of his chin, thin and white, old enough to have settled into his face as a permanent feature. His hands around the glass were very still. "I spent 3 years planning a wedding," Elena said. "I know exactly what I wanted it to mean." "You wanted it to mean you'd made the right choice." She didn't answer. "And now you know you didn't," he said. Not cruelty, just fact, delivered with the directness of someone who had no interest in softening things that wouldn't be improved by softening. "I wanted—" She stopped, refilled her glass from the bottle the bartender had left within reach, drank. "I wanted someone to ruin it, properly. I wanted to wake up and have the whole thing just gone. The venue, the invitations, the rehearsal dinner, all of it, just gone, so I didn't have to be the one to end it. Now you are the one ending it." "Now I'm the one ending it," she agreed. She laughed, a short and hollow sound that wasn't really laughter. "You know what the worst part is? I'm not even surprised. I'm angry, but I'm not surprised, and that might be the most humiliating thing I've ever had to admit to a stranger in a bar." The man looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read. "Damien Vale," he said. "Elena Cross." They didn't shake hands. The door to Rudy's opened 12 minutes later. Elena had been watching the bourbon pool at the bottom of her glass, when the change in air pressure told her the door had moved, and she looked up in time to see 3 men come through it in a configuration that her body understood before her mind did. They were spread too wide for customers, moving with the compressed attention of people who were here for something specific, and the one in front had his hand already at his jacket in the way that meant Damien Vale moved. She would later try to reconstruct the sequence and find she couldn't. One moment he was on the stool beside her, glass still in hand, and then the glass was on the bar and he wasn't on the stool anymore, and the man in front had barely cleared his jacket when something happened that resulted in him on the floor with Damien's knee in his back and his arm at an angle that produced a sound Elena's brain refused to categorize. The second man made it 2 steps before Damien was already moving in his direction, and Elena slid off her stool and pressed herself against the bar and watched with the particular cold clarity that shock sometimes produces as the man who'd been sitting quietly telling her the difference between what she wanted and what she'd had ended a three-man ambush in the time it took her to exhale. The third man ran. Damien straightened. His suit was minimally disturbed. He looked at the bartender who had flattened himself against the back bar and was staring, and said simply, "Call whoever you need to call after we leave." Then he looked at Elena. "We need to go," he said. "Who were those?" "Now." She went. The car was already outside. A black vehicle with tinted windows, idling at the curb, a driver who didn't turn around when they got in. Damien pulled the door shut and the car moved immediately, and Elena sat in the dark interior with her pulse loud in her ears and looked at the man beside her and said, "What just happened?" "3 men came to kill me," Damien said. "You were sitting next to me. That makes you a problem for certain people." "I was just sitting at a bar." "Yes. I don't have anything to do with—" She stopped. "Who are you?" It wasn't the question she'd meant to ask. She'd meant to ask who those men were, what they wanted, why any of this was happening on the worst night she'd already been having. But the question that came out was the one that had been forming since he sat still and listened and knew the difference between a thing and what a thing was supposed to mean. Damien Vale looked at her in the moving dark of the car and told her. He told her cleanly, without decoration, the way he'd told her everything else, that he ran the city's most significant criminal organization, that it had been in his family for 2 generations, that it generated more revenue than most of the legitimate corporations headquartered in the downtown district she could see through the tinted window, and that the men who'd come into Rudy's bar on a Wednesday night in August were employed by a rival who had been making territorial calculations for the past 6 months and had apparently decided that tonight was the moment to act on them. Elena listened. The city moved past the window. "You need to understand," Damien said when he finished, "that taking you home right now is not safe. They know your face." "You're telling me I can't go home?" "I'm telling you, the men who saw you sitting next to me in that bar will assume you know things you don't know, and they will act on that assumption. And the safest place for you tonight is not wherever you were planning to sleep." "I wasn't planning to sleep anywhere," Elena said. "I just left my apartment." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you don't have somewhere to be," he said. "No." "All right." She watched the city. The car crossed into a part of downtown she didn't know well. Older buildings, less foot traffic, the kind of streets that existed as transitions between places people actually meant to go. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I have a meeting," Damien said. "My attorney has been trying to reach me for 3 hours." "I don't care about your attorney." "You might," he said. "In about 20 minutes. What?" The office building had no signage. The elevator required a key. The attorney, a woman named Claire Holt, who looked like she'd been awake since the previous morning and had made peace with that fact, was waiting in a conference room on the 14th floor with documents spread across a table and an expression that told Elena she was used to being the person in the room who understood things no one else did yet. Damien took the chair at the head of the table. Elena sat because standing felt like a decision she'd have to explain. Claire Holt looked at Damien without preamble. "The trust closes at 6 a.m. The trustees have confirmed they will not extend. Your grandfather's language is unambiguous. The controlling interest passes to you only if you meet the terms at the time of transfer." "What terms?" Elena said. Both of them looked at her. "She's here," Damien said. "Tell her." Claire looked at Elena with the specific expression of a person reevaluating a variable. Mr. Vale's grandfather established the family trust with a condition. The assets, which represent the primary financial infrastructure of his organization, transfer to him unconditionally only if he is legally married at the time of transfer. Otherwise, they pass to a board of trustees who have made it clear they intend to liquidate and divide. "He needs a wife," Elena said. "He needs a legal wife," Claire said, "before 6 a.m. The silence in the room had a particular texture to it. Elena could hear the ventilation system. She could hear her own breathing and the specific quality of Damien Vale's stillness beside her, which was different from the stillness of someone who was calm, and more like the stillness of someone who was holding a great deal in place by force of will. She looked at him. You can't find someone, she said. In... She checked the clock on the conference room wall. 4 hours and 40 minutes. No, he said, and there's no other option. There are several other options, he said. None of them are good. Elena thought about the apartment, the unlocked door, the paper lanterns on the floor of the hallway, the wedding that was no longer a wedding, the invitations that would need to be unsent, the venue deposit that was almost certainly non-refundable, the look on Marcus's face when he'd seen her standing there. Not shame, not real shame, just the mild annoyance of a man whose schedule had been disrupted. She thought about what she'd said in the bar. I wanted someone to ruin it, properly. I'll do it, she said. Damien looked at her. I'll marry you, Elena said. Not forever, not for real, but tonight, in front of whoever needs to witness it, I will sign whatever needs to be signed. She held his gaze. And in exchange, when I walk back into that apartment tomorrow, I walk in as a woman with a husband. And Marcus Hale gets to spend the rest of his life knowing that the woman he cheated on married a more dangerous man than he will ever be within 12 hours of finding out. Claire Holt said nothing. Damien Vale looked at Elena Cross in the conference room light for a long moment, long enough that she felt the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. And then he said, You understand what you're agreeing to. I understand I have nowhere to sleep and a wedding to cancel, and a man I hate still holding the keys to a life I don't want anymore, Elena said. I understand that enough. Something moved in his face, not softness exactly, something more like recognition. All right, he said. Claire Holt was already reaching for the documents. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took place in a warehouse space 3 blocks east, in a room that smelled of concrete dust and cold air. With the justice of the peace, Claire had apparently kept on retainer for situations that required flexibility about venue and hour. They stood across from each other under a work light that threw hard shadows and said the words that were required to be said, and Elena's voice didn't shake, which surprised her, and Damien's didn't either, which didn't surprise her at all. When it was done, he looked at her. You should sleep, he said. I'm fine. You've been awake since before the worst day of your life, he said. You're not fine, but you will be. She didn't know why that landed the way it did, not as reassurance, which she would have resented, but as information, delivered by someone who appeared to be in possession of facts she wasn't yet privy to. The car took them to an estate on the north side of the city that she registered in fragments because exhaustion had finally overtaken the adrenaline. High walls, security that moved with the same quiet precision as Damien himself, a house that was large and completely without the self-congratulation that large houses usually wore. She was shown to a room. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. Mrs. Elena Vale. She had no idea what she'd done. She had no idea if the things she'd agreed to would outlast the morning, or what morning would even look like now, inside the walls of a man whose name she hadn't known 3 hours ago and whose enemies had already seen her face. What she knew was this. Somewhere across the city, Marcus Hale was waking up to the fact that she hadn't come back. And somewhere in that same city, a document existed with her name on it, next to a name that everyone in the room tonight had spoken carefully, the way people speak things that have edges. Elena Cross lay back on the bed in the clothes she'd been wearing when she carried the lanterns home. She did not sleep. Across the estate, in a room she hadn't seen yet, the man she had married was on the phone, and whatever he was saying it quietly, and the compound's lights burned through the early hours while the city outside the walls made its ordinary noises and had no idea what had just been signed into existence in a warehouse 3 blocks east of Meridian Avenue. By 6 a.m., the trust had transferred. By 6:15, someone who worked for a man named Vincent Calder had pulled the marriage record and made a phone call. Elena didn't know any of this yet. She found out when the door to her room opened at 7 a.m., and Damien Vale stood in the frame and said, with the same flat economy he'd used for everything else, "We have a problem. We have a problem." Elena was already sitting up when he said it. She hadn't slept. She'd drifted somewhere between consciousness and the gray static of exhaustion. Still in yesterday's clothes, her shoes still on, one arm across her eyes against the early light coming through curtains that were expensive enough to block most of it, but not all. She'd heard the door. She'd heard his footsteps, the particular weight of them, measured and unhurried even now. She looked at him in the doorway and said, "How bad?" "Manageable," he said. "For now." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have at 7 in the morning." He stepped into the room. He was already dressed, same precision as the night before, dark jacket, shirt with the collar open, the scar on his jaw catching the light. He looked like a man who had not slept either and had decided that was simply a condition to operate within. "Vincent Calder has a copy of our marriage certificate." Elena put her feet on the floor. "How?" "He has someone in the county clerk's office. Standard practice in this city." Damien stopped near the window, didn't sit. "He's already sent a message through intermediaries. He believes the marriage is a tactical move. He wants to meet." "What kind of meet?" "The kind where he gets to look you in the eye and decide how much of a problem you are." She stood up. Her back ached from the way she'd been lying, half-braced, and her mouth tasted like old whiskey, and the kind of sleep that doesn't restore anything. She went to the ensuite without asking permission and ran water over her face and looked at herself in the mirror and catalogued what she saw without sentiment. Dark circles, mascara that had migrated south, a woman who had made a significant decision under emotional distress and was now living in the first hour of its consequences. She dried her face on a towel and came back out. "I need clothes," she said. Damien looked at her steadily. "There's a selection in the closet. Sizes vary. My assistant made arrangements last night." "Your assistant?" "She's efficient." Elena opened the closet. It was true. A row of options, still tagged, ranging from casual to something approaching formal. She pulled out dark trousers and a slate-gray blouse without examining them too closely and looked at Damien. "Are you going to stand there while I change?" "No," he said, and left. Oops. Breakfast was in a kitchen that occupied the back of the house, all stone countertops and industrial appliances and windows that looked onto a walled garden where 2 security personnel were doing a slow perimeter walk without appearing to hurry. A woman Elena hadn't seen before set coffee on the counter and left without speaking. Damien was already at the table with documents, physical paper she noticed, not a tablet or a laptop. He read without looking up when she came in. She poured coffee, sat across from him, drank. "Tell me about Vincent Calder," she said. He looked up then. "Why?" "Because I apparently need to sit across from him at some point, and I'd rather not do that without knowing who I'm looking at." Damien set down the paper. "He runs the Eastern Distribution Network. Half the port. He and my grandfather reached a boundary agreement 15 years ago that has been fraying for the past 3. He picked up his coffee. "He's intelligent, controlled, and he has been waiting for an opening. He believes the trust condition was my vulnerability." "Was it?" A pause. "Yes. And now it's not." "Now it's not," he said. "Which means he has to recalculate. The meeting is his way of doing that in person." Elena looked out at the garden. One of the security personnel had stopped walking and was standing very still near the east wall, looking at something she couldn't see. "He's going to test me," she said. "Yes." "What does he expect to find?" Damien looked at her across the table. "A woman who panicked. Someone I pulled in off the street under duress, who doesn't know what she's agreed to and can be rattled into saying something useful." "And what am I actually?" Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. More the ghost of acknowledgement. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's honest." "I can work with honest," Elena said, and finished her coffee. Yet, the call from her phone, she'd had it in her jacket pocket the entire time, had not looked at it once since she'd walked out of the apartment, came while she was reading through the summary Claire Holt had sent over regarding the trust terms. 47 missed messages, 19 from Marcus, 11 from Diane, the rest from numbers she didn't immediately recognize, which meant word was moving. She silenced it and kept reading. Then it rang. Actual ringing, not a notification, Marcus calling live. She stared at the screen for 2 full rings and then picked up. "Elena." His voice had the particular quality of a man who'd been rehearsing, controlled regret, calibrated to the precise level that might still be recoverable. She knew the register. She'd watched him use it in professional situations. "I need you to come home so we can talk about this." I'm not coming home, she said. Where are you? Diane can manage her own situation. You can't just disappear. The wedding. The wedding is not happening, Elena said. Her voice came out flat and certain in a way that surprised even her, like something had cauterized overnight. I'll have someone contact the vendors. The venue deposit is in my account, so I'll handle the refund. Elena, you're reacting. I'm not reacting, she said. I'm done. I was done when I walked out the door, and I'm done now. Don't call again. She ended the call. Across the room, Damien hadn't looked up from his documents, but he'd heard. She knew he'd heard because the quality of his stillness had changed, the way a room changes when someone in it is paying attention. Ex-fiancé, she said. I know. He called it reacting. Men who've been caught doing something tend to reframe the response as the problem, Damien said, without heat, without looking up. It's a reflex. Has anyone ever told you that you're very calm about things that should probably require more commentary? Frequently, he said. Marcus called twice more before noon. Elena declined both. What she didn't decline at 11:47 was the second call, Diane. She answered it because she was in the garden by then, alone, and she answered it the way you sometimes press on a bruise, not because it helps, but because the pain at least confirms the damage is real. You need to come home, Diane said. Her voice was different from Marcus's, not rehearsed, agitated, brittle, with the defensive edge of someone who knew exactly what they'd done and had spent the night constructing arguments for why it was defensible. This isn't just about you, Elena. There are people who are going to find out, and it's going to be embarrassing, Elena said. That's not what You were in my apartment, Diane. In my room. In my bed. She said it quietly, standing in the walled garden with the sun off the stone and a security guard 20 feet away who was politely not existing. I carried lanterns home for the wedding we planned, and you were... It wasn't planned. That's supposed to make it better. I'm not saying it makes it better. I'm saying... Diane's voice cracked slightly, and Elena waited, and what came through the crack was not remorse, but something more like resentment, the particular fury of someone who has been caught and cannot forgive the person who caught them. I'm saying you were never really there, Elena. You were planning a wedding. You weren't. You were building something, and Marcus was just... He was a piece of it. Stop, Elena said. It's true, and you know it. I said stop. Her voice came out with an edge she hadn't known she still had access to, clean and cold and final. You don't get to explain me to myself, not today, not ever. She paused. I have a meeting this afternoon. Don't call this number again. She hung up and stood in the garden and breathed through her nose until the heat in her chest subsided to something she could work with. The security guard 20 feet away was looking at the east wall with professional intensity. She went back inside. Claire Holt arrived at 1 p.m. with a leather portfolio and the expression of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by the specific shapes that crisis took. She sat at the dining room table across from Elena and Damien and walked them through what she'd confirmed since the morning. Calder wants the meeting at the Aldrich, she said. Neutral territory by convention. His people, your people. Public enough that no one does anything stupid. When? Damien said. Tonight, 7. He's moving fast. He's nervous, Claire said. The trust transfer was complete by 6:03 a.m. He missed his window. Now he needs to understand what he's dealing with before he decides what to do next. Elena was looking at the portfolio. What does he know about me? Claire turned to her. Your name. Your former employer. Cross-marketing consulting, yes? Your address. Your previous engagement to Marcus Hale. She paused. He knows you and Damien met less than 12 hours before the ceremony. He'll use that. How? He'll try to establish that the marriage was expedient, a paper arrangement. He'll use that to argue to other interested parties that Damien's hold on the trust is contestable. It's not a legal argument, it's a political one. And if I seem like someone who chose this, Elena said, Claire studied her, then it complicates his narrative considerably. Damien had been watching Elena through this exchange. She became aware of it without looking at him directly. The quality of his attention, which was like weight. "You don't have to come tonight," he said. "I know," Elena said. "I'm saying it's a choice, not an obligation." "I know what you're saying." She met his gaze. "I'm coming." She called her office at 3, got her assistant, Nathan, who was 24 and handled stress by becoming very precise and slightly faster. "Nathan, I need you to push the Aldrich creative pitch to next Thursday. Tell them I have a family situation." "The Aldrich pitch is—" A pause. "That's actually a coincidence. The Aldrich is—" "I know what it is." She hadn't told him where she was. She hadn't told him anything. "Push it to Thursday, reschedule the Meridian walkthrough, and hold everything else. I'll be remote for the next few days. Are you okay?" She looked out the window at the estate's north wall, at the slow walk of security along its perimeter, at the city beyond it that she'd lived in for 8 years and was currently viewing from inside a compound belonging to a man whose name 3 hours ago she hadn't known. "I'm working on it," she said, and hung up. Damien found her in the library at 4, a room she'd located by accident while looking for a second bathroom, floor-to-ceiling shelves, 2 chairs by a window, dust in the light. She was sitting with her knees up and her phone face down and her eyes on the middle distance. He sat in the other chair without preamble. For a while, neither of them said anything, which she was learning was something he was comfortable with in a way that most people weren't. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone who would have had second thoughts by morning." "I had second thoughts," Elena said. "I had them all night. I just didn't have anywhere better to go with them." He was quiet. "What about you?" she said. "What about me? What did you think was going to happen when you sat down at that bar, before I walked in?" He looked at the window. The light was going, the afternoon pulling west. "I thought I was going to have one drink and wait for Claire to stop calling and figure out which of my options was the least damaging. And instead 3 men came through the door, and a woman told me she wanted someone to ruin her wedding." "I was being honest," he said. "You were being honest. In my experience, that's rarer than people think, especially under pressure." Elena looked at him. At the scar along his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the hands that had moved with such terrible efficiency in the dark bar. At the quality of stillness that wasn't peace, but was something she didn't have a word for yet. "I don't know how to do this," she said. It cost her something to say it. "Whatever tonight is, I've never—" "You don't need to know how," he said. "You need to be exactly what you are, which is a woman who decided something and is standing by it. That's simple. Calder will look for a crack, for uncertainty, apology, something to get between." He held her gaze. "Don't give him one." "What if I'm not as steady as I seem?" "You walked out on your own life last night without screaming," Damien said. "You signed papers in a warehouse at 2 in the morning with a man you didn't know. You took a call from your sister this afternoon and held your voice completely still." He paused. "You're steadier than you think." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "You were listening," she said. "The garden. The audio system covers the exterior. Standard. You could have told me." "I could have." He didn't apologize. She was beginning to understand that he didn't apologize for things he'd chosen deliberately. "I wasn't trying to surveil you. I was making sure you were safe." She held that. It was a different thing than what she was used to, a form of protection that didn't disguise itself as something softer. It didn't perform consideration. It simply was. "All right," she said. They left the estate at 6:15 in 2 vehicles. Elena was in the first with Damien, 2 security personnel in front, another vehicle behind with Claire, and 2 more. She wore the slate blouse from the morning, had borrowed a jacket from the closet that fit well enough, and had managed lipstick and composure in roughly equal measure. The Aldrich Hotel sat at the top of Meridian's financial district, like a building that had decided decades ago it was done justifying itself. Old stone, brass fittings, revolving doors staffed by people in uniforms that cost more than Elena's first car. Damien's vehicle pulled into the side entrance, and they moved through a corridor she suspected most guests didn't know existed, upstairs by private elevator, into a private dining room on the 7th floor where the table was already set, and Vincent Calder was already there. She'd expected older. She didn't know why. The name, maybe, the weight of it in other people's mouths. Vincent Calder was perhaps 60, trim in a charcoal suit, silver at his temples, with the particular face of a man who had spent decades being the smartest person in rooms that rewarded a certain kind of smart. He had pale eyes that moved to Elena immediately and stayed. He stood, extended a hand to Damien first, then to her. "Mrs. Vale," he said. His voice was warm in the way that certain instruments are warm, technically true, designed for effect. Elena shook his hand. "Mr. Calder, please." He gestured to the table. "Sit." They sat. Staff materialized to pour water, then disappeared. Calder's two people positioned themselves near the wall. Damien's two mirrored them. Claire sat to Damien's left with her portfolio closed. Calder looked at Elena for a moment that was precisely one beat too long. "I understand," he said, "that congratulations are in order, though I confess the timing surprised us." He smiled. "A wedding at 2 in the morning does suggest urgency." "Most meaningful decisions are urgent," Elena said. Calder's eyes moved with interest. "Indeed. And how did you and Damien meet?" She let a breath pass, not long enough to be a hesitation. "In a bar. He was there. I was there. Some things don't require a longer explanation than that." "No," Calder said. "No, some things don't." He looked at Damien. "The trust transfer went smoothly, I take it." "Completely," Damien said. Calder picked up his water glass. "I understand your grandfather had particular ideas about stability. Marriage as a condition." He set the glass down. "One wonders what he would have thought of the timeline." "My grandfather was practical," Damien said. "He would have recognized a practical decision." "Practical." Calder repeated the word as if tasting it. His pale eyes moved back to Elena. "Your previous engagement, Mrs. Vale, to a Marcus Hale, I believe." Elena kept her face neutral. She felt Damien's stillness beside her, different from calm, more like a coiled thing. "That engagement ended," she said. "Yes, I understand it ended rather suddenly. The same evening as your marriage to Damien, in fact." He smiled again, warm and precise as a scalpel. "Quite a night." "It was," Elena said. "I wouldn't recommend it as a template, but it worked out." "And Mr. Hale," Calder paused, as if the thought were occurring to him naturally. "I imagine he was distressed by the news." She understood what he was doing. He was laying down the thread that Marcus was leverage, that she could be moved through him, that the wound was fresh enough to bleed under pressure. He was being elegant about it. She gave him credit for the elegance and put it aside. "Marcus Hale," Elena said, "is a man I spent 3 years with who was in bed with my sister when I came home yesterday." She held Calder's pale eyes without blinking. "If you're considering using him as a pressure point, I want to be clear, you are welcome to. He's available, his judgment is poor, and I have no interest in protecting him from anything." She paused. "It would be a waste of your resources, but I understand you have to make your own assessments." The room was very quiet. Calder looked at her for a long moment. The warmth in his face didn't disappear exactly. It shifted, recalibrated, became something more like genuine attention. He looked at Damien. Damien looked back at him with an expression that said nothing and implied everything. "Well," Calder said. The dinner that followed was almost ordinary. Negotiations conducted in the vocabulary of courtesy, each sentence carrying its actual meaning 2 layers down. Damien spoke in measured blocks. Claire interjected twice with specifics that closed off angles Calder was exploring. Elena ate and listened and said 3 more things, each precise, each landing. It was only later in the car moving back through the city that she felt her hands shaking, not from fear, from the release of the specific tension she'd been holding in place for 2 hours. Spine straight, voice level, eyes steady, every instinct that wanted to flinch pressed flat and locked down while a man with pale eyes tried to find the seam in her. Damien looked at her hands. You can shake, he said quietly. No one here. She pressed them flat against her thighs. I'm fine. I know. A pause. You were exceptional in there. I told a stranger my sister slept with my fiancé. You told him it wasn't a wound he could use, Damien said. That's not the same thing. She looked out the window. The city moved past, lit up and indifferent, going about its business while hers had entirely transformed. He's not done, she said. No, Damien agreed. He's not done. What comes next? He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved. Inside the car, the space between them had changed shape again, had been changing shape since the bar, since the warehouse, since the garden and the library, and the seven-floor room where Calder's eyes had moved over her like an instrument. I need to show you something, Damien said. When we get back. What? Evidence, he said, of what Calder is planning. We intercepted communications this afternoon while you were in the library. He paused. It changes the situation. Elena looked at him. In the passing lights of the city, his face was hard to read, angled and still, and carrying what it was carrying without distributing the weight. How much, she said. Significantly, he said. And before she could ask the next question, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and something in his face went very still in the way that meant the news was bad enough to require stillness to receive it. He said one word to the driver. The car changed direction. Damien! Elena's voice came out flat and controlled, and she was aware that she had stopped being surprised by her own steadiness, which was maybe the most unsettling development of the last 24 hours. What's happening? He looked at her. In the moving dark of the car, with the city outside and whatever was waiting at the end of the driver's new route, he said, They took Marcus. They took Marcus. The word sat in the air between them and Elena's first reaction, the one she would be ashamed of later, or maybe not, maybe never, was not fear. It was a cold, involuntary thought that arrived before she could filter it. He made his own bed. Then the second reaction came in right behind it, slower and heavier and more honest. Whoever took Marcus did it because of her. Where? She said. His apartment, an hour ago. Damien was already on a second call, speaking in low-clipped sentences to someone she couldn't see. No signs of struggle according to the building's exterior camera, which means he went willingly or he didn't have time to fight. Calder did this during dinner, while we were sitting across from him. Damien ended the call. Yes. Elena looked out the window. They were moving east now, away from the estate, through the kind of streets that existed in the hour after midnight as pure infrastructure, lit from above, empty at ground level, the city's circulatory system without the body it served. He knew I wouldn't protect Marcus, she said. He heard you say it. So why? Because knowing you won't protect him and knowing what you'll do when he's taken are two different calculations, Damien said. Calder is checking which one is true. She understood. She sat with it and understood it completely and felt the specific fury of a woman who had stated her position clearly, had been honest about it, and was still being used as a mechanism. What does he want? She said. Specifically, what does taking Marcus get him? He'll make contact with a demand. Most likely he wants something from me. The port access agreement, the North Territory line. Something he couldn't get at the table. Damien's jaw was set at the angle she was starting to recognize as contained anger. Using you as the emotional variable is the leverage. And if I'm not the emotional variable, then he escalates until you are. He looked at her. Or until I give him what he wants to protect you. Don't do that, Elena said immediately. Elena, don't give him anything on my account. Her voice came out harder than she'd expected, with an edge that surprised even her. I mean it. I told him in that room that Marcus wasn't a pressure point. If you give Calder something to protect Marcus because of me, I become exactly what he thought I was. Damien was looking at her with that quality of attention she still didn't have a word for, the kind that didn't evaluate or measure but simply received. All right, he said. That's it? All right? I said all right. The car moved. She looked at her hands in her lap, still, not shaking now, the shakiness from earlier having burned off into something denser and colder. "Where are we going?" she said. "Safe house. East side." He paused. "The estate may be compromised. We're assessing." "Compromised how?" "We're assessing," he said again, and this time she heard what was underneath it. Not evasion, but a man holding 17 things at once and rationing what he released to keep the structure from collapsing. She recognized that. She'd done it in conference rooms. The shape of it was the same. She stopped asking and let him work. The safe house was on the 4th floor of a building that looked from the street like a mid-tier accounting firm. The lobby had a security desk with a man behind it who nodded at Damien without speaking. The elevator required a key card. The 4th floor was 3 rooms and a narrow kitchen and windows that looked onto a light well. No exterior view, no sightlines in. Elena sat at the kitchen table. Someone put coffee in front of her. She drank it. Damien was on the phone in the far room. She could hear the cadence of his voice, but not the words. Controlled, low, periodic silences where he was listening. Claire Holt arrived 20 minutes after they did, portfolio under her arm, with the expression of a woman who had been pulled from sleep and had arrived past caring about the evidence of it. She sat across from Elena and opened the portfolio. "Calder's communication from this afternoon," she said, turning a printed page toward Elena. "Intercepted by Damien's security team during the dinner." Elena looked at it. It was a transcript. Message, format. No names on the sending end, just timestamps and content. She read it once, read it again, looked up at Claire. "This isn't about Marcus," she said. "No," Claire said. "He's after the marriage certificate itself." Elena pushed the page back slowly. "He has someone who can challenge the ceremony's legality, the justice of the peace." "Walter Greer," Claire said. "He's performed 9 ceremonies for Damien's organization over the past 11 years. Calder's team has documentation suggesting several were conducted under irregular circumstances. Licensing gaps, timing discrepancies." She paused. "If he files a legal challenge on the validity of the ceremony, the trust transfer becomes contestable. It doesn't mean he wins, but it means a process, months, during which the assets are frozen. And a frozen trust means no operating capital, no legitimate financial infrastructure. It forces Damien to function entirely within the gray economy for the duration of the dispute." Claire's voice was level, informational, the way doctors are level when delivering information that will take a moment to fully register. He'd survive it, but it would cost him relationships, leverage, and the specific kind of stability that keeps the larger structure from becoming a war zone. Elena was quiet. "And Marcus," she said, "is insurance. If the legal challenge doesn't move fast enough, Calder uses Marcus to pressure you to request an annulment voluntarily." Claire met her gaze. "Your signature dissolving the marriage would be faster than a court challenge and considerably cleaner." The kitchen was very still. Elena could hear Damien's voice from the far room, the cadence of it, and the light well outside the window was showing the first gray of coming morning, and she had been awake for what felt like a continuous and uninterrupted stretch of disaster. "He planned all of this," Elena said. "Calder, before the dinner." "He began planning when the trust transfer completed," Claire said. "He had approximately 8 hours. He used the dinner to look at me. To confirm what he was working with, yes. And I told him exactly what I was working with," Elena said. "I told him Marcus wasn't leverage, and he immediately made Marcus leverage." "He made Marcus a mechanism," Claire said. "That's slightly different. He doesn't believe Marcus will move you directly. He believes the existence of a man in danger because of you will move Damien." A pause. "He read Damien correctly, partially." Elena understood the partial. She sat with it. Damien came back into the kitchen. He looked at the page on the table, looked at Claire. "She knows." "Yes," Claire said. He pulled out the chair beside Elena and sat. She noticed he didn't sit across from her, didn't place the table between them, sat beside, parallel, both of them facing the same direction. "The justice of the peace," Elena said. "Walter's licensing lapsed 6 weeks ago," Damien said. "He renewed it. The renewal was processed the morning after our ceremony, but there's a 6-week window during which he performed 3 ceremonies, but ours among them, while technically unlicensed." Can Calder prove it? He has a copy of the licensing board's internal records. Damien's voice was flat. Someone at the board is his, has been for probably 2 years. So the ceremony is challengeable. Potentially. Legally, there are arguments on both sides, parties acting in good faith, subsequent ratification. But Calder doesn't need to win the challenge. He needs to initiate it. His hands were on the table, still, and she looked at them and looked away. A 60-day freeze while the court reviews would be enough. Elena said, "We get remarried." Both of them looked at her. "Not in a warehouse at 2 a.m. with a potentially unlicensed officiant," she said. "Properly. Licensed officiant, county clerk present if we have to, witnesses on record. Something that's untouchable." She looked at Damien. How fast can Claire make that happen? Claire was already writing something. 24 hours if we move immediately. Then we move immediately. Damien was looking at her with the same expression he'd had in the Aldrich when Calder's pale eyes had moved over her and found less than he was looking for. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to the look a man gets when he realizes the ground he's standing on is more solid than he'd tested for. "You're sure," he said. "I already married you once," Elena said. "I can do it again with better paperwork." Yet. Marcus's call came at 4:47 a.m. Elena's phone, her number, not his. She picked up because the number on the screen was Marcus's, and then a voice that was not Marcus said her name. "Mrs. Vale." A man's voice, unhurried, with the particular smoothness of someone who had delivered this kind of call many times. "I'd like to speak with your husband." "He's here," Elena said. She handed the phone to Damien without comment. He took it, put it to his ear, and his face went to the flat and total stillness she now recognized as the specific face he put on when he was controlling something that was trying to get out. She listened to his side of it, which was almost nothing. 2 short affirmatives, a pause of perhaps 90 seconds, and then, "No. You've mistaken what this situation is." Another pause. "That's your decision." He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. "He wants the North Territory Agreement signed over by end of business tomorrow," Damien said, "in exchange for Marcus. And if not..." Damien was quiet for a beat. He implied what "if not" looks like. He was detailed about it. Elena looked at the phone on the table. She thought about Marcus, not about what he'd done, not about Diane, not about any of it. Just about Marcus as a human body in a room somewhere being detailed about. Her stomach moved in the way that bodies move when they receive information about damage to other bodies. Involuntary. Animal. "You're not signing over the territory," she said. "No." "Then we need to find him before the deadline." "My people are already working on it." "Working how quickly?" "Quickly." He looked at her. "Elena, you can't be involved in this part." "I'm already involved in every part." "There's a difference between what happened at the Aldrich and..." "I know what the difference is," she said. "I'm not asking to be in the field. I'm asking to not be put in a room while things happen around me." She held his gaze. "I'm a liability if I'm uninformed. You know that." He did know it. She could see him knowing it. "All right," he said. Third time he'd said it to her in 12 hours. She was starting to understand it was the word he used when someone had made an argument he couldn't improve on. By 6 a.m., 3 things had happened. Claire had initiated the remarriage paperwork through a contact at the county clerk's office, who owed Damien a significant and unitemized favor, and a licensed officiant had been identified and woken and persuaded. Damien's security team had narrowed Marcus's location to a 3-block radius in the warehouse district south of the port, the same area where, Elena noted without commenting, she'd been walking 24 hours ago in a different life. And Damien's head of security, a man named Rourke, who had the dimensions of a doorway and the face of someone who had decided long ago that expressions were inefficient, came into the safe house kitchen and said 3 words that changed the shape of the morning. "We have a problem." Damien looked at him. "The location we narrowed," Rourke said. "It's not a Calder property." A beat of silence. "Whose is it?" Damien said. Rourke looked at Elena, then back at Damien, which was its own kind of answer. "Tell her," Damien said. The building is registered to a holding company. Rourke's voice was level, without effect, a man delivering bad information the way someone might read a weather report. The holding company traces to a legal entity that dissolved 14 months ago. Before it dissolved, it was partially capitalized by... He stopped. Say it, Damien said. By your uncle, Rourke said. By Franklin Vale. The kitchen was absolutely still. Elena watched Damien's face, watched it do almost nothing, which was more frightening than if it had done something. A single muscle along his jaw moved once and stopped. Franklin, he said, we pulled the registration chain at 4 a.m. when the location came up clean on all Calder sources. We started working backward. Rourke set a folder on the table. There's more. Damien opened the folder. Elena watched him read. Watched his eyes move across the page with the controlled speed of someone who was reading facts they were already partly prepared for and were hoping not to find. She watched the thing that happened to his face in the third or fourth second. Not collapse, nothing so visible as that, but a kind of internal pressure, a compression, the face of a man who has just had something confirmed that he had spent significant energy not confirming. He closed the folder. How long? He said. The communication records go back 8 months, Rourke said. Your uncle has been in contact with Calder since before your grandfather died. The room held that. Elena put it together quietly, the way she put things together when she was building a presentation and the data didn't match the client's assumptions, the trust condition, a condition Damien hadn't known about until it was almost too late. The convenient proximity of 3 armed men at a bar on a specific night. The marriage challenge arriving within hours of the ceremony on the basis of documentation that required advance preparation. The holding company. The building. He told Calder about the trust condition, she said. Both men looked at her. Your uncle told Calder about the marriage requirement, she said. That's how Calder knew to move when he did. That's why the men came to the bar. Not to kill you. Or not only to kill you. She looked at Damien. If you died before you married, the trust would have passed to the board, which means Franklin had an arrangement with Calder about what happened to the assets after the board took control, Damien said. His voice was very quiet. The quietness of it was not calm. He's been planning this since before your grandfather died, Elena said. Since before my grandfather was sick, Damien said. The silence that followed was the kind that has mass. Rourke stood by the door with his folder and said nothing. Claire, who had come back in at some point during this, sat at the table's edge and looked at her portfolio and did not open it. Elena looked at Damien. His hands were flat on the table. He was looking at a point between them, not at anything in the room, at something further back. She had the sudden and precise understanding that the man sitting beside her had just had a wound that predated everything she knew about him reopened in a kitchen at 6 a.m. after 24 hours of continuous disaster, and that he was doing what he always did, holding it in place, keeping the structure upright, not distributing the weight. She put her hand over his on the table, not gently, just firmly. A fact. He looked at her hand. We have about 18 hours before Calder's deadline on Marcus, she said. Franklin is a separate problem. Franklin is the root problem. Yes, she said, which is why we handle the branch first and the root when we have ground to stand on. She held his gaze. What do you need right now? He looked at her for a moment with something in his face that she couldn't fully read. The compressed something, the held thing, and underneath it a quality she hadn't seen on him yet, which was the specific exposure of a person who is used to being the most prepared person in every room, suddenly not being prepared for what's in front of him. He turned his hand under hers and gripped it once, briefly, and let go. Rourke, he said, get the extraction team to the Southport block. I want eyes on that building in the next 30 minutes. Already moving, Rourke said, and left. Damien stood, picked up the folder, looked at Claire. The remarriage. We do it at 8 a.m. here. Whatever's necessary. Understood, Claire said. He looked at Elena. You said you could do it again with better paperwork, he said. I said that, she agreed. 8 a.m. I'll be here, she said. He left the kitchen. She heard him on the phone before he'd cleared the doorway, voice low and controlled and moving fast, the specific sound of a man rerouting everything toward a single point. Elena sat at the kitchen table in the gray early morning of a city that didn't know any of this was happening, and she looked at the folder Damien had left and thought about Franklin Vale, who had apparently decided to sell his nephew's future before the body of his father was cold, and who had Marcus Hale in a building on the Southport block as a piece of that transaction. She opened the folder. She read for 6 minutes. She closed it. Then she stood up and went to find Rourke, because there was something in the registration chain she'd seen that Damien hadn't had time to finish reading, a name in the secondary holding structure, a name she recognized, not from Damien's world, not from anything that had happened in the last 24 hours, but from her own life, from a client meeting 8 months ago, from a man who had sat across from her in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Meridian Avenue and asked her to develop a marketing strategy for a commercial real estate portfolio that she now understood had never been about real estate. She found Rourke in the hallway outside the kitchen, phone to his ear, one hand pressed flat against the wall like he was taking the building's pulse. She said his name. He held up a finger without looking at her. 1 minute, and she waited, and when he looked at her, she said, "The secondary holding company in that registration chain, Vantage Commercial Group." He looked at her. "I know that name," she said. "I need 5 minutes with the full document trail." Rourke studied her for exactly 2 seconds with the face of a man calibrating risk. Then he took the phone from his ear and said into it, "Hold," and looked at Elena and said, "Come with me." The room Rourke used was the smallest of the three. A desk, a monitor, 2 chairs, a whiteboard covered in notations she couldn't fully parse. He pulled the registration documents on screen and stepped back and let her look. She found it in 40 seconds. Vantage Commercial Group, incorporated 18 months ago, secondary stakeholder in the holding entity that owned the Southport building. Listed managing partner. A name. A name she'd seen on a business card she'd thrown away 8 months ago because the project had concluded and she'd had no reason to keep it. Daniel Reese. She said it out loud. Rourke said, "Who is he?" "He hired my firm 8 months ago. Commercial real estate portfolio," he said. "Marketing strategy for a redevelopment project on the Southport block." She looked at Rourke. "I did the work. 3 months. The project folded. He said the financing fell through." A pause. "It didn't fall through. The project was never real." Rourke was already on the phone. "He used my firm to do due diligence on the neighborhood," Elena said. "Foot traffic patterns, zoning variance analysis, infrastructure capacity, the kind of research that tells you what a block can support." She looked at the screen. He was mapping the territory. For Calder. Before anyone made a move. Rourke said something into the phone and ended the call and looked at her with an expression that had shifted from calibrating risk to something closer to a man who had just added a significant piece to a structure and felt it change shape. "Damien needs to hear this," he said. "Yes," Elena said. "He does." Damien was in the second room with 2 of his people and a city map spread across a folding table when Rourke brought her in. He looked up. Rourke said 4 sentences. Damien's eyes moved to Elena. She told him about Daniel Reese. She told it the same way she'd been telling things since the bar. Flat, sequential, without editorializing, the facts in the order they'd happened. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the city outside doing its early morning business at a remove. Damien looked at the map. "They've been planning the port takeover for at least 18 months, he said. Not to her specifically, to the room, to the people in it, to the shape of what they were now looking at together. Reese was the prep work. Franklin was the inside access. Calder was the mechanism." He looked at Elena. "And your firm was the research tool they used without your knowledge." "Without my knowledge," she confirmed. "Reese, where is he now?" "I don't know. The project ended. He paid the final invoice. I never heard from him again." Damien looked at Rourke. "Find him," he said. "He's either with Calder or he's made himself scarce because he knows what's coming." He looked back at the map. "What's the building status?" One of the men, younger, with a tablet, said, "Eyes on the exterior since 0540. 2 guards on the ground floor entrance, 1 on the roof. No movement in or out in the last 20 minutes. Thermal suggests 3 to 4 people inside on the 2nd floor." Marcus is on the second floor, Damien said. Most likely. Damien straightened. He looked at the map for another moment with the quality of attention she'd come to recognize as the final pass before a decision locked in. Then he looked at Elena. 8 a.m., he said. We do what Claire arranged, then we move on the building. That's an hour from now, she said. Yes. You're getting remarried before an extraction. Sequencing matters, he said. The legal challenge goes away at 8:01. Everything after that is just violence, she said. Resolution, he said, and went back to the map. The second ceremony took 9 minutes. A woman named Judge Patricia Morrow, who arrived at 7:58 in a coat over her pajamas and the expression of a person who had decided that Damien Vale's favors were worth any hour they were called in at, stood in the safe house kitchen with Claire as witness and Rourke as second witness, and married Elena Cross to Damien Vale for the second time in 36 hours, with documentation that was untouchable and time-stamped and filed digitally with the county clerk's office at 8:03 a.m. Elena said the words. Damien said the words. Judge Morrow signed and left. Claire looked at the filed confirmation on her tablet and said simply, "Done." Damien looked at Elena across the kitchen table. The light in the room was the flat gray of early morning through the light well window, and he was already wearing the jacket he'd put on for the operational debrief, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd been wearing since the Aldrich, and neither of them said anything about what had just happened because the room around them had too much else moving through it. What he did was look at her long enough that it registered as deliberate. Then he said, "Stay here with Claire." "Damien?" "Not a negotiation," he said. "Not hard, just final." She looked at him. "Come back." He held her gaze for a beat. Then he left, and Rourke left behind him, and the safe house went quiet in the particular way of a space that has recently held a lot of people and now holds almost none. But she lasted 40 minutes. She spent them at the kitchen table with Claire, watching the tablet that was pulling a discrete external feed from the building's nearest street camera. Rourke had patched her in without being asked, which she chose to interpret as respect. The feed showed the exterior of the Southport building in the colorless light of early morning, unremarkable, the kind of building that existed everywhere in the warehouse district. And then at 8:49, the feed showed Damien's 2 vehicles pulling into the cross street, and then showed nothing useful because the angle cut off before the entrance. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't know. She picked up. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voice she recognized. "You should have taken the annulment," Franklin Vale said. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. She made herself breathe through her nose, one full breath before she spoke. "Mr. Vale," she said. "My nephew has walked into a building that belongs to me," Franklin said. He sounded like Damien did sometimes. The same cadence, the same economy, but where Damien's voice was compressed, Franklin's was loose. Comfortable. The voice of a man who believed he was watching something go the way he'd planned it. "I'm giving you a courtesy call." "A courtesy." "There's a car outside. If you come with us now, before this gets to a point where Damien can't be managed, I can guarantee you walk away from this whole arrangement without damage." A pause. "I know what you signed. Twice, apparently. But paper doesn't protect you from what happens in the next hour." Elena looked at Claire, who was already writing on a notepad and turning it toward her. Keep him talking. "You planned this before your father died," Elena said. Silence. "You told Calder about the trust condition," she said. "You provided the documentation on the licensing gap. You knew about Vantage and Daniel Reese and the port territory because you put it together." She paused. "How long before your father died did you start planning his successor's failure?" Elena. His voice shifted slightly. Not quite cold, but the looseness had left it. "You're an intelligent woman who got caught in something you don't understand." "I understand it fine," she said. "You wanted the trust to fail. You wanted the assets to go to the board so you could access them through Calder. But Damien got married and the trust transferred and your timeline collapsed, so you're improvising." She kept her voice level. "How am I doing?" A pause longer than the previous ones. "The car is outside," he said. "I'm not coming," Elena said. "And you should know, this call is being recorded." She ended it. Claire said, "It's not being recorded." He doesn't know that, Elena said. She stood up. Where is Rourke's secondary team? Elena. Where? Claire looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman re-evaluating a variable for the second time in 24 hours. Then she said, standing by 2 blocks south, 4 people. Call them, Elena said. Franklin Vale is either in a vehicle outside this building or close enough to be. She picked up her jacket from the chair back. And then I need you to get Damien on the line because his uncle just told me where this is going. The next 14 minutes happened in fragments that Elena would later remember with the specific clarity that crisis produces. Not a smooth sequence, but a series of stills, each one fully lit, each one carrying more weight than it should have fit. Rourke's secondary team confirming Franklin Vale's vehicle 1 block north of the safe house. Claire's voice on the phone, low and fast, patching through to Damien inside the Southport building. A sound through the phone that was not a voice. Impact, movement, something that made Elena's chest compress before Damien's voice came through, saying, I'm here. What? She told him about the call. She told him fast and without softening it. Through the phone, she heard him breathe once. He's in the city, Damien said. 1 block north of us. Rourke's secondary team has eyes on the vehicle. Don't let him move. His voice was the flat operational voice, the one that didn't have room in it for what it was carrying. We're 40 seconds from Marcus. Stay inside. Damien, 40 seconds, he said, and the line went to the sounds of the building. Boots on floor, a door, 2 sharp sounds she couldn't identify that her body understood without her permission. She stood in the safe house kitchen with the phone to her ear and made herself stay still, which was the hardest physical thing she had done in a night and a morning full of hard things. And she listened to the sounds through the phone and did not move. 30 seconds, 40. Rourke's voice through Claire's tablet from the exterior feed. Second floor clear. We have the asset. Elena let out a breath that felt like it had been stored since the car ride. Then 3 things happened in fast sequence. Claire's tablet showed Franklin Vale's vehicle beginning to move, northbound, away from both the safe house and the port building. Rourke's secondary team had 2 people on foot and 2 in a vehicle, not enough for a clean intercept without risking exposure. Damien's voice came back through the phone. We have Marcus, he's... A pause. He's not in good shape, but he's alive. Another pause. Elena. I'm here. Franklin's moving. I know. I'm watching. Rourke can intercept, but it turns into a street situation if Franklin's people push back. His voice was tense in a way she hadn't heard yet. The tension of a man who has solved the immediate problem and arrived at the one behind it. If we lose him now, he disappears for a month and Calder rebuilds around him. What do you need? She said. A pause. There's a route, Damien said. North along the port access road. If someone were at the Meridian overpass before he reaches it, what's at the overpass? A gate. Rourke controls the mechanism. If it closes before Franklin's vehicle reaches it, his driver has to reroute. It adds 12 minutes, enough time for Rourke's team to reposition. Who closes the gate? She said. He didn't answer immediately. Damien, who closes the gate? There's a manual override panel on the east pylon, he said. It requires physical access. The kitchen was very still. Claire was looking at Elena. How far is the overpass? Elena said. 4 blocks east of your current position. She was already moving. Elena? His voice through the phone was sharp now. The controlled sharpness of a man who has said stay inside and is watching the parameter fail in real time. Rourke's team is 2 people on foot and they're south of the vehicle, Elena said. She was through the kitchen, into the hallway, moving toward the stairwell. 4 blocks east. What does the panel look like? A beat. Gray housing, yellow handle, he said. Pull it down and hold it for 6 seconds. Gray housing, yellow handle, 6 seconds. Elena. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not quite fear, something adjacent to fear. A crack in the operational flatness. If his driver sees you, then his driver sees a woman jogging at 6 in the morning, she said. I'm not armed. I'm not Rourke. I'm just a woman who got lost. She hit the stairwell door and took the stairs at speed, phone in her left hand, right hand on the railing, 4 flights in the gray light of early morning, out through the ground floor exit into the street where the city was just starting to produce its first real foot traffic. A delivery truck, 2 people walking a dog, the particular quality of a city in the first hour of admitting it's awake. She ran. Not a sprint, not the kind that draws attention. The jog of a woman with somewhere to be, shoulders back, breathing through her mouth, counting blocks in her head. 1. The port access road was to her left, and she could see the top of the overpass structure 4 blocks ahead, and she could not see Franklin Vale's vehicle yet, but she knew it was moving. 2 blocks. Her lungs were pulling hard now, the cold air sharp in her throat, and she could hear Damien through the phone saying her name at intervals, tracking her, and she didn't answer because she needed her breath, and because there was nothing to say until the thing was done or wasn't. 3 blocks. The overpass was visible now. Concrete pylon, east side, gray housing approximately 8 feet up the face of the structure. A utility ladder bolted to the pylon's side, the kind of thing that exists on infrastructure everywhere and that no one looks at because it is designed not to be looked at. She looked at it. She heard the vehicle before she saw it, the low sound of an engine moving at moderate speed on the port access road, still a block south of the overpass, the driver not hurrying because there was nothing to hurry from. Elena reached the east pylon. She went up the ladder. Her hands on the rungs were cold, the metal biting her palms, and her shoes were not designed for climbing, and she climbed anyway. 6 rungs? 8, until she was level with the gray housing, and there was the yellow handle, exactly where he'd said. And Franklin Vale's vehicle was rounding the block below, and its headlights swept across the underside of the overpass structure above her. She grabbed the yellow handle, pulled it down, held it. 1 second, 2. Her right arm shaking from the cold and the run and the height and whatever else was moving through her body that she didn't have a name for and didn't need one. 3 seconds, 4. The gate mechanism groaned somewhere above her, a sound like a large thing being moved that didn't want to be moved. 5. Below her, Franklin Vale's vehicle came to a stop. She heard the driver's horn. Once, then twice, then silence. 6. She held it for 2 more seconds, because 6 felt like what he'd said, but also because she was a woman on a ladder on the side of a bridge pylon before 7 in the morning, and she needed to be sure. She let go. She came back down the ladder with her palms burning and her heart in her throat, and she stepped off the last rung onto the ground and stood with her back against the pylon and breathed. Through the phone, Damien's voice said, "It's closed." "I know," she said. "Rourke's team is repositioning. 2 minutes." "Okay." "Elena." A pause. The crack in the operational voice again, wider now. "Are you hurt?" She looked at her hands. The palms were raw from the rungs, not bleeding, close to it. Her lungs still pulling, her legs unsteady in the way of legs that have been asked for something unusual. "No," she said. "Come back to the safe house." "I'm already walking." She was walking. Back the way she'd come, through the city that was increasingly awake now. A woman in yesterday's clothes with raw palms and a phone at her ear, walking the 4 blocks back through the early morning of a city that had no idea what had just been decided in it. She heard, through the phone at a distance, then closer, the sound of Rourke's team making contact with Franklin Vale's stalled vehicle. She heard doors. She heard voices, not the words. She heard the particular quality of a situation being contained. And then she heard, closer, footsteps she recognized, the weight of them, measured, unhurried, and she turned and Damien Vale was on the sidewalk 30 feet behind her, still moving, his jacket open, something dark on the left sleeve that might have been from the building and that she chose not to examine too closely. He walked toward her. She stopped. He reached her and stopped too, 3 feet between them, and looked at her the way he'd looked at her at the Aldrich when Calder's plan had come apart in his hands. Not surprise, something past surprise. Something that looked almost like a man seeing solid ground after an extended stretch of not knowing where to put his weight. He looked at her hands. "I said stay inside," he said. "You needed the gate closed," she said. "There were other—" "It's done," she said. "It's closed. Rourke has your uncle. Marcus is alive. The marriage is filed and untouchable." She held his gaze. "What else is there?" He looked at her for a long moment in the early morning light, with the city coming awake around them, and the sound of Rourke's operation completing itself somewhere behind them. And his expression did something she hadn't seen it do yet. Not the compression, not the flatness, not the controlled weight-bearing. Something opened in it, briefly, like pressure releasing. He reached out and took her right hand and turned it palm up and looked at the marks the rungs had left. He didn't say anything about it. He closed her hand gently and didn't let go of it and said, "Claire has a car coming." "Okay," Elena said. "We need to be somewhere safe when Franklin's people figure out what happened." "I know." "And then," he said, and paused, and she heard something in the pause that hadn't been there before. Not the operational voice, not the weight-bearing voice, something with more give in it, something that had been held a long time and was beginning to understand it didn't have to be held in exactly that way anymore. "And then we need to talk." She looked up at him. Behind them, Rourke's voice on the radio, brief and final. "We have him." Somewhere across the city, Vincent Calder was waking up to a morning in which his timeline had failed, his mechanism had been intercepted, and the woman he'd looked at across a dinner table and decided was the soft point in Damien Vale's armor had just... Rourke's voice on his radio said, "We have him," and the city kept moving around them like it always does, indifferent to the specific weight of the moment, and Elena stood on the sidewalk with Damien's hand around hers and felt the particular exhaustion that arrives not during crisis, but in the first second after it, the body understanding, finally, that it can stop. He let go of her hand, not abruptly, the way you set something down carefully. "Car's 2 minutes out," he said. "Okay." They stood on the sidewalk and didn't fill the space with words, which she had come to understand was one of his specific qualities, the ability to be in a moment without narrating it. She was starting to find it less unsettling and more like a form of respect. Most people talked because silence felt like an accusation. Damien was quiet because he decided the silence was accurate. The car came. They took Marcus to a private medical facility on the north side that had no signage and a staff that asked the minimum number of questions. Elena sat in the waiting area outside the room where a doctor was working on him, not because she felt she owed Marcus her vigil, but because she'd been the reason he was taken, and her body seemed to have decided that meant she needed to be in the building while he was treated. Damien sat beside her. She said, after a while, "How bad?" "2 broken fingers, bruised ribs, some facial damage." He paused. "Nothing permanent." He was terrified. "Yes." "He's not..." She stopped, restarted. "He's not equipped for any of this. He's a man who cheated on his fiancée at a middle-class apartment, and he ended up in a room because of things that had nothing to do with him." "He ended up in a room because Calder made a calculation about you," Damien said. "That's not your responsibility." "I know the legal distinction," Elena said. "I'm talking about the other kind." He was quiet for a moment. "There's always collateral," he said. "In the world I move in, there are people who get close to the edge of it without knowing the edge is there. Some of them fall." A pause. "Marcus fell a short distance. He'll recover." "And the next person?" "There won't be a next person. Not after today." She looked at him. "You sound certain." "I am." His voice carried the specific flatness of a thing that had been decided rather than hoped for. Calder overextended. He used Franklin, he used Reese, he moved on Marcus. He left a documentation trail that Claire has been building a case from since 3 a.m. By end of business today, he will receive a communication from parties he cannot afford to cross, informing him that continued aggression against Vale interests will result in that documentation reaching people he does not want to hear from. "Mutually assured destruction," Elena said. "It's held the city together for 20 years, Damien said. "He knows how it works." "And Franklin." The name landed differently. She felt it land in him, the slight shift, the compression that happened in his jaw when something pressed against something he was still holding in place. "Franklin is a separate matter," he said. "That's what I said last night, that we'd handle the branch first. Yes, so now we handle the root." He was quiet for long enough that the doctor came out of Marcus's room, spoke briefly and clinically, stable, resting, someone could see him in an hour, and went back down the corridor, and the waiting area returned to its low institutional hum. He's my father's brother, Damien said. Not as an excuse, as information, the way he delivered most things, just the fact, no decoration, letting her decide what weight to give it. I know, she said. He was in the organization for 30 years before my father died. 30 years before I took over. He looked at the middle distance. There were things my grandfather didn't see or chose not to see. I chose not to see some of them after him. A pause. That's on me. What happens to him? He's removed, Damien said, from every position, every holding, every access point. His arrangements with Calder are exposed to the people those arrangements were hidden from. He loses the thing he was trying to take and everything he already had. He paused. He goes quietly, or the documentation becomes a different kind of problem for him. And he'll go quietly. Franklin is many things, Damien said. Stupid is not among them. Elena nodded. She thought about the phone call, the loose, comfortable voice, the courtesy call framing, the car outside. The voice of a man who had been planning for so long he'd started believing the plan was reality. She thought about what it meant to invest that much in someone else's failure. He must have hated your grandfather a long time, she said. Damien said nothing. Or he hated coming second a long time, she said, which is sometimes the same thing. A pause. Yes, Damien said. Just that. She saw Marcus for 11 minutes. He was propped in the medical bed with his right hand wrapped and his left eye swollen most of the way shut, and the look of a man who had been comprehensively introduced to consequences. He looked at her when she came in, and the look had several things in it. Shame, relief, and something she recognized as the specific discomfort of a person who needs to say something and has no idea how to begin. She sat in the chair beside the bed and saved him the trouble. I'm not here to discuss us, she said. There's nothing to discuss. I'm here because you were hurt because of where you were standing, and I needed to see that you were going to be okay. He said, Elena, I mean it, she said. I don't want an apology. I don't want an explanation. She looked at him steadily. I want you to understand that what happened between you and Diane has nothing to do with what happened to you last night, and the people who took you will not come near you again. That's finished. He was quiet for a moment. Who is he? Marcus said. Not hostile. Hollow, the way people are hollow after fear has moved through them and taken the furniture with it. My husband, she said. The words sat in the room. You married him, Marcus said. Yes. Elena. He said her name with a weight that 2 days ago would have meant something to her, and now mostly just meant he was tired and in pain and reaching for a language that no longer applied. You don't know him. You can't. Marcus, she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was just final, which was different. I spent 3 years knowing you. I know what that looked like. She stood up. Rest. Someone will make sure you get home safely. She went to the door. I'm sorry, he said, for what I did. I know it doesn't. I know you are, she said. Take care of yourself. She closed the door quietly behind her and stood in the corridor for a moment with her hand still on the handle and her eyes on the floor. Not in grief, not exactly. In the specific act of putting something down that she'd been carrying in various forms for a long time, setting it on the floor of the hallway of a medical facility with no signage, and walking away from it toward the waiting area where Damien Vale was sitting with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the door she'd just come through. She sat beside him. Okay, he said. Yes, she said, and meant it. No. They went back to the estate in the afternoon. The security assessment had cleared it. Whatever vulnerability had existed was addressed. 2 people Rourke had identified as compromised were removed. The perimeter reconfigured. The house was the same house it had been when Elena had spent her first night in it, looking at her hands on the edge of an unfamiliar bed. But she moved through it differently now, with the ease of someone who has been tested in a place and found it survivable. She showered for the first time in 36 hours. Stood under the water for longer than was strictly necessary, and let the heat work on the ache that had settled into her shoulders and the backs of her legs and her raw palms. She dressed in clothes that were actually hers. Someone had retrieved a bag from her apartment, she didn't know who, didn't ask, and went downstairs to find the kitchen. Damien was already there. He was making coffee. Not having someone make it, making it himself, standing at the counter with his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up, doing the ordinary thing with the ordinary attention he gave everything. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at him doing the ordinary thing and felt something shift in her chest in a way she didn't immediately have language for. He turned when he heard her, poured a second cup without asking. She sat at the table. They drank. After a while, he said, "Claire confirmed this morning. Calder received the communication at 2 p.m. His attorney responded at 3. The agreed terms are a permanent cessation of territorial aggression, a formal withdrawal of the legal challenge, and a transfer of the port access arrangements to Vale Interests as a settlement for what he put in motion." "He gave you the port," Elena said. "He gave us considerably more than he intended to 2 days ago," Damien said, "because he underestimated what he was walking into." She looked at her coffee. "He underestimated me." "He underestimated what we were," Damien said. The word were hung in the air with a slight awkwardness that was new. Not tension exactly, but the specific awareness of a conversation that had arrived at its real subject from the side, through the door of practicalities, and was now standing in the room. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the directness he brought to everything but something else in it now. Not assessment, not the reading of a variable, something more exposed than that. Something that had been there in the car when she was 4 blocks east, climbing a ladder in the wrong shoes, and he'd said her name through a phone with a crack in the operational voice. "We should talk about the arrangement," she said. "Yes." "The trust is secure. The challenge is withdrawn. Calder has settled." She held his gaze. "The reasons for the arrangement have been resolved." "They have," he said, which means nothing has to continue that you don't want to continue," he said. "That was always the terms. You knew that." "I know what the terms were." He was quiet. She was quiet. The kitchen held the late afternoon light the way rooms do when everyone in them is paying more attention to each other than to the room. "I went back in my head," Elena said, "to the bar. To what I said." She set her cup down. "I said I wanted someone to ruin my wedding. I said it like a joke. Like the kind of thing you say when you're drunk on bad whiskey and your life has just fallen apart." She paused. "But I've been thinking about what I actually wanted." Damien waited. "I wanted to stop being the woman who stayed," she said. "I wanted to stop being the person who plans and accommodates and holds everything together and looks up one day to find out she's been doing it alone the whole time." She looked at her hands on the table, the marks still faint on her palms. "I wanted to stop being someone that people assume will absorb whatever they do and still be there in the morning." "You're not that person," Damien said. "I wasn't," she said. "Or I was, and I'm not anymore. I'm not sure which." She met his eyes. "What I know is that the woman who walked into that bar 2 nights ago and the woman sitting here are not the same. And the difference isn't you. You didn't change me." She paused. "You just were there while I changed myself. And that's a different thing. But it's not a small thing." Damien looked at her across the table. In the late afternoon light, he looked like a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had started to understand that the weight was not proof the thing was valuable. That you could set certain things down not because they didn't matter, but because you'd finally earned the right to. "I had Claire draft annulment papers," he said. She looked at him. "This morning, before the ceremony, before I knew you were going to—" He stopped. "I prepared them in case you wanted a clean exit after everything was resolved. I wasn't going to ask you to stay in something you walked into under duress." "Where are they?" she said. "My desk." She stood up. She went down the hallway to the room he used as a study, which she'd been in once, briefly, when Rourke was running the operation. The desk was organized in the way of someone who needed to find things under pressure. Everything placed deliberately, nothing decorative. The annulment papers were in a folder at the left corner of the desk. She picked them up. She came back to the kitchen. She stood at the counter and looked at the documents, at her name in the appropriate blanks, at the legal language that would undo the warehouse at 2 a.m. and the work light, and the words they'd said in front of a justice who'd been called in a favor, and Judge Morrow in her coat over her pajamas, and all of it. the whole strange, compressed construction of the last 48 hours. Damien hadn't moved from his chair. She tore the documents in half. Not in anger, not in the heat of anything. Deliberately, with both hands, the clean tear of someone who has made a decision and is expressing it through action, because some decisions don't require words and some gestures mean more than sentences. She set the two halves on the counter, then she sat back down across from him. "I don't want an exit," she said. "I want what we actually built, which is not what either of us planned, and not simple, and not without things I'm going to need to understand better than I do." She held his gaze. "But it's real. What happened in that building in the South Port District was real. What you did when you let me see the documents instead of managing the situation around me was real. What you did when you said, 'All right, every time I made an argument you couldn't improve on' was—" She stopped, let a breath pass. "Real." Damien looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the torn papers on the counter. He looked back at her. "You understand what staying means," he said. Not a question exactly. More like the last responsible check, the final pass before the decision locked in. "I understand it better than I understood my own apartment 3 days ago," she said. "I understand it better than I understood anything I planned for 3 years. She paused. "I understand that it's not safe in the conventional sense, and that it will require things of me I haven't been asked for before, and that I don't know the shape of everything I'm agreeing to." She held his gaze without blinking. "I also understand that I climbed a bridge pylon in dress shoes this morning and held a gate mechanism for 6 seconds while your uncle's car sat underneath me, and my hand shook the entire time and I didn't let go." He was quiet. "That was me," she said. "Not someone I was performing, not someone I was becoming, someone I apparently already was, and didn't know it until the situation required her." She spread her raw palms on the table. "I want to be that person. I can't be that person in the life I was building with Marcus." Damien looked at her hands. He reached across the table, the same motion she'd made in the safe house kitchen, the same plain fact of contact, and put his hands over hers. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. Tip-tat. Franklin Vale came to the estate 3 days later. She didn't know he was coming. Damien hadn't told her because he'd wanted to handle it without asking her to be in the room, which she understood, and had told him she respected, and then had positioned herself in the hallway outside the study anyway, because she was not a woman who waited in other rooms anymore. She heard most of it through the door. Franklin's voice, the same loose and comfortable cadence she'd heard on the phone, attempting and failing to find the register that might still be persuasive. The vocabulary of family, appeals to history, to their father, to the organization they'd both inherited in different ways and with different expectations. The particular language of a man who has done a damaging thing and is now trying to renegotiate not the act, but its classification. Damien's voice. Quiet. Final. Not loud. Not theatrical. Not any of the things that scenes like this tend to become in the rendering of them. He said what he had to say in the same economy he applied to everything, and the economy was its own kind of verdict. The absence of rage was more complete than rage would have been, because rage still means the other person has the capacity to affect you, and what Damien's voice in that room communicated was something more absolute. He had decided. It was done. She heard Franklin leave. She moved down the hallway before the study door opened and went to the kitchen and was standing at the counter when Damien came in. He looked at her. "You were in the hallway," he said. "I was in the kitchen," she said. He looked at her for a moment and didn't argue it. "Is it over?" she said. "Yes." "All of it." Calder's terms are in effect. Franklin's access has been terminated across every channel. Reese, he paused. Reese will be a separate conversation for another day. He's not a threat without Calder's backing. "And the organization," she said, "is stable." He came to the counter, stood beside her, not across from her, the same quality she'd been noticing. Always parallel, always beside. More than it was, the port territory changes the operational picture significantly, and Calder's people know what happened when they moved against us. "Against us?" she said. He looked at her sideways. "Against us," he confirmed. She picked up her coffee, looked out the window at the walled garden where the security personnel did their slow perimeter walk, and the morning light was doing what morning light does to stone, making it look like something that has been here a long time and intends to continue. "I need to go to my office tomorrow," she said. "All right." Actual office. In person. "I've been remote for 3 days, and Nathan is going to start developing original theories about what's happening. I'll have someone drive you. I can drive myself." "You can," he said, "and someone will drive you." She looked at him. He looked back at her with an expression she was learning. The particular set of it that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the same approximate territory, that lived in the corner of his mouth and the angle of his eyes and nowhere else. The expression that appeared when she said something he found accurate. "Compromise," she said. "Someone drives me there. I drive home." "That's not a compromise." "It's the compromise I'm offering." A beat. "All right," he said. She looked back out the window. The security personnel had completed the east wall and were moving to the north. The garden was the same garden it had been on her first morning here, when she'd stood in it and taken a call from Diane and held her voice still and pressed her thumb into the lock of her own grief until it shut. It looked different now. Not because the garden had changed. "I need to deal with the apartment," she said. "My lease. My things. When you're ready." "I'm ready now. I've been ready since I left the lanterns on the floor." She paused. "I just needed to get through everything else first." He was quiet. "I'll call the landlord this week," she said, "and I need to call my mother before she hears something from Diane and invents something worse." She thought about that call, the specific geography of it. Her mother, who had liked Marcus and said so frequently, and would need the situation explained in terms that omitted approximately 90% of what had actually happened. "That's going to be a long conversation." "I'll make sure you have privacy for it," Damien said. "That's very diplomatic." "I'm a diplomatic person." She looked at him. "You are absolutely not a diplomatic person." The corner of his mouth. "I'm diplomatic with you," he said. She held that. Let it settle in next to the other things she was carrying now, which were different in weight and kind from the things she'd been carrying when she walked into Rudy's bar on an August night with the taste of cheap whiskey still in her future. Those had been the weight of accumulated disappointment, of 3 years of planning a life that turned out to have been a solo project, of a woman who had been choosing to see a situation clearly and then choosing not to, back and forth, until her own front door opened and the choosing was done. What she carried now was different, heavier in some ways. The knowledge of what Calder's pale eyes had looked like across a dinner table when he decided she was the soft point. The sound through a phone of something happening in a building she couldn't see. Raw palms from the rungs of a ladder on a bridge pylon. The specific ache of a person who has operated beyond their own estimated capacity and is now living in the aftermath of having done so. Lighter in other ways she didn't have full words for yet. "I want to keep working," she said. "My business, my clients, Nathan." She looked at Damien. "I need you to understand that. Whatever this is, whatever we're doing, I'm not replacing one life with another. I'm not moving into your world and becoming a function of it." "I know that," he said. "You say that now." "Elena." His voice was quiet, level. "I watched you take a call from your sister the morning after the worst night of your life and hold your voice completely still. I watched you sit across from Vincent Calder and dismantle his strategy using the most painful thing that had happened to you as the instrument." He looked at her. "I don't have any interest in diminishing what you are. It would be a significant waste." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood at the counter of the kitchen while the morning moved through the window and the city beyond the walls went about the ordinary business of a city that had no idea what had been decided in it over the past 4 days. What had been built and torn down and rebuilt in the gap between a woman leaving her apartment with paper lanterns and a woman standing in a kitchen choosing, clearly and without duress, the life she was standing in. She thought about the lanterns. She'd thought about them periodically over the past 4 days, in the small gaps between things, the way you think about the last detail of a life when the rest of it is already gone. Pale gold and ivory on a hallway floor. She'd chosen those colors with a man who had been choosing something else at the same time. In a store on a Tuesday night 6 months ago, when the wedding felt like a real thing and she'd been working hard enough at the feeling that she'd almost managed it. She didn't want the lanterns back. She didn't want the hallway or the apartment or the life that had been built around the work of not seeing things clearly. She didn't want the version of herself that had spent 3 years making a plan and calling the plan a future. What she wanted was the woman who had climbed a ladder in the wrong shoes and held on for 6 seconds while her hands shook and her lungs burned and everything was uncertain and she had not let go. That woman she wanted to keep. "The paper lanterns?" she said. Damien looked at her. "I left them," she said. "In the hallway. When I walked out." She paused. "I thought I was leaving them because I didn't want what they were supposed to mean anymore." She paused again. "You told me that. In the bar. You said wanting to leave the lanterns was different from not wanting what they were supposed to mean." "I remember," he said. "I think I actually left them," she said, "because I knew I was going to need both hands free." He looked at her, and there it was again. The corner of his mouth, the angle of his eyes, the expression that wasn't a smile, but held the same warmth a smile holds. The specific warmth of a person who has been a long time in the company of their own hardness and has found something that asks for neither its performance nor its abandonment. He reached out and took her hand, not carefully this time, not the measured contact of a moment that was trying to say something, just the straightforward grip of a person holding on to something they intended to keep. She held back. Outside the window, the security personnel completed the north wall and moved to the west, and the garden held the morning light the way it always had. And the city beyond the walls moved in its ordinary way through an ordinary day, and inside the kitchen of the Vale estate, a woman who had walked out of her own life 4 days ago stood next to the man she had married twice in 36 hours and understood, with the particular clarity that only comes after everything has been stripped to its actual structure, that the future she'd been planning for 3 years had never been a future. This was. Not because it was safe or simple or promised anything smooth about what came next. Not because the world they were standing in had suddenly become the world she would have chosen from the outside, but because she was standing in it as exactly who she was, with both hands free and both eyes open, beside a man who had said all right every time she'd made an argument he couldn't improve on, and who was holding her hand now the way you hold something you are not planning to set down. The war was over. The old life was over. The lanterns were still on the floor of a hallway somewhere across the city, pale gold and ivory in their plastic sleeves, and Elena Vale, had both hands full of something else now. She did not look back.